The Xelari had conquered 17 star systems through pure logic and calculated efficiency. Their silver ships moved through space like thoughts, through an orderly mind, precise, purposeful, and utterly without emotion. For 3,000 years, they had built their civilization on the foundation of rational discourse, mathematical precision, and the complete elimination of what they termed cognitive inefficiency. They were, by every measure, they understood, perfect. So when their long-range sensors detected the third planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, they approached with their usual methodical confidence. The electromagnetic signatures suggested a developing civilization primitive by Xelari standards, but intriguingly resilient. These humans, as they called themselves, had survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and countless natural disasters that should have eliminated any logical species. The Xelari Council decided this warranted investigation. From their cloaked observation vessels in high orbit, the Xelari began their cultural analysis with characteristic thought. They cataloged human languages, social structures, technological development, and behavioral patterns. Everything proceeded according to protocol until they encountered something that made their advanced analytical systems stutter and crash. Human humor. The first incident occurred when Senior Analyst Vorth attempted to decode what humans called me. The digital image showed a feline creature with text declaring, "I can has cheese." Vorth ran the phrase through 17 linguistic matrices, consulted xenobiological databases on human nutrition, and even analyzed Earth's dairy production statistics. The conclusion was, baffling humans were apparently using grammatically incorrect language to discuss food distribution with domestic animals that could not respond. When Vorth discovered that millions of humans found this hilarious, he filed a report suggesting widespread neurological dysfunction. The confusion deepened when communication specialist Dex encountered television programming. She observed humans producing artificial laughter at predetermined intervals, triggered by what appeared to be social failures and mild physical injuries. When she attempted to map the logical connection between human distress and auditory pleasure responses, her computational framework experienced what could only be described as the Xelari equivalent of a headache. But it was the discovery of puns that nearly caused a diplomatic incident. Language cryptographer Zeph intercepts a human transmission containing the phrase "time flies like an arrow, fruit flies like a banana." After 47 hours of analysis, Zeph concluded that humans were either suffering from severe temporal displacement disorders or had developed an incomprehensible obsession with projectile weaponry and insect dietary preferences. The fact that this statement was considered comedy gold by human standards led to serious discussions about whether the species was suitable for contact at all. Among the research team, however, one individual found themselves increasingly fascinated rather than frustrated. Junior xenobiologist Quarn had always been considered slightly irregular by Xelari standards, too curious, too willing to explore tangential research paths, too likely to ask but why. When presented with established facts, while their colleagues grew increasingly exasperated with human irrationality, Quarn felt something they had never experienced before: genuine intrigue. Quarn began conducting unauthorized deep dive studies into human comedy. They analyzed slapstick, observing how humans found physical mishaps amusing rather than concerning. They studied satire, watching humans mock their own leaders and institutions in ways that would constitute treason on 17 different Xelari worlds. They examined sarcasm, a communication method that seemed to involve saying the opposite of what one meant, while somehow conveying the actual meaning through vocal inflection and context. The more Quarn studied, the more inadequate their analytical tools became. They tried to reproduce human humor with clinical precision, creating what they calculated should be the perfect joke. The quantum probability of molecular displacement in carbon-based organisms results in an outcome deviation that produces laughter-inducing stimuli. When they tested this on their colleague Vorth, the response was 12 minutes of complete silence, followed by a formal complaint to the research director. Undeterred, Quarn attempted physical comedy, carefully calibrating the angle and velocity required to slip on a banana peel. Based on human video analysis, the result was a flawlessly executed maneuver that deposited them precisely on the deck in accordance with gravitational law. When no laughter followed, Quarn realized they were missing something fundamental about the human experience. The breakthrough came when Quarn began observing real human interactions rather than produced entertainment. They watched children playing in Earth's parks, their laughter bubbling up spontaneously as they chased each other and tumbled in grass. They observed friends sharing jokes over meals, their amusement stemming not from the mechanical construction of wordplay, but from the shared understanding and emotional connection between them. They witnessed a human stand-up comedian discussing personal failures and traumatic experiences, somehow transforming pain into something that brought an entire room together in collective joy. But the moment that changed everything was when Quarn observed a human construction worker who had accidentally painted himself into a corner. Instead of expressing frustration or calling for assistance, the human looked at his predicament and began laughing, not bitter or angry laughter, but genuine amusement at his own mistake. He called out to his co-workers, "Well, this is what we call a painting myself into a corner situation." The terrible pun made his colleagues groan and laugh simultaneously, and somehow the mistake became a moment of connection rather than embarrassment. In that instant, Quarn felt something unprecedented in 3 millennia of Xelari civilization. The urge to smile, they didn't have the facial muscles for it, but the internal sensation was unmistakable. For the first time in their existence, Quarn understood that humor wasn't about logic or efficiency, it was about being wonderfully, perfectly, beautifully human. This revelation sent shockwaves through Quarn's neural pathways. They began to recognize that human laughter served functions their species had never considered. It diffused tension, built social bonds, provided comfort during hardship, and created shared experiences that transcended individual differences. Humor was not a cognitive inefficiency, it was an advanced social technology that humans had developed to navigate the complexities of existence together. Quarn's research took on new urgency. They studied how humans use self-deprecating humor to build trust, how they employed wit to challenge authority without direct confrontation, how they created inside jokes that strengthened group identity. They observed how laughter could transform strangers into friends, enemies into allies, and ordinary moments into treasured memories. Most remarkably, they discovered that humans often laughed hardest during their darkest times, using humor as a light to guide them through difficulties that would have logically demanded despair. When Quarn presented their findings to the Xelari Council, the response was predictably logical and entirely wrong. The council concluded that humor was a psychological defense mechanism developed by a primitive species, unable to cope with reality through rational means. They recommended minimal contact protocols and continued observation from a safe distance. But Quarn had learned something else from humans. Sometimes the most important discoveries require breaking the rules. While the council debated appropriate contact procedures, Quarn made an unauthorized decision that would change the course of interstellar relations forever. Working alone in their research laboratory, Quarn composed what they believed might be the first Xelari attempt at interspecies humor. They carefully crafted a transmission that would reach Earth's major communication networks, containing what they hoped humans would recognize as an attempt at a joke. The message read, "Greetings, Earth humans. We are the Xelari, an advanced civilization from the stars. We have been observing your species and are confused by your habit of making knock-knock jokes. We tried this format ourselves. Knock-knock. Who's there? Quanto who? Quantum mechanics suggests this door both exists and doesn't exist until observed, which makes this entire social interaction probabilistically uncertain. We hope this brings you the emotion you call laughter. Please respond if you understand our attempt at your humor." The transmission that followed from Earth nearly overloaded Xelari receivers across the solar system. It wasn't just laughterette, it was an explosion of joy, delight, and something Quarn was only beginning to understand. Affection? Humans didn't laugh at the Xelari attempt at humor, they laughed with it, embracing the awkward sincerity and earnest effort behind the mechanical joke structure. The response came in thousands of languages, but the message was universal. "Welcome to the neighborhood. That was terrible and wonderful. And we love you for trying. Here's how knock-knock jokes really work. And here are 17,000 variations to get you started. Also, thank you for not leading with weapons or warnings. Any species that opens diplomatic contact with a joke is our kind of people." Within hours, Earth's internet had exploded with quantum knock-knock memes, artistic tributes to Xelari humor attempts, and collaborative efforts to create jokes that might make sense to a logical alien species. Humans began crafting mathematical puns, physics-based words, and carefully explained cultural references designed to build bridges across the void of space. But the most profound response came from a group of human comedians who created a special broadcast for their new alien friends. They explained the deeper purpose of humor, how it helped humans cope with uncertainty, connect with strangers, and find light in darkness. They shared stories of laughter, healing wounds, comedy, bringing communities together, and jokes serving as tiny acts of rebellion against a universe that often seemed chaotic and unfair. As Quarn watched these transmissions, they felt their understanding of existence fundamentally shift. Humor wasn't just about entertainment, it was about hope. It was humanity's way of saying that even when nothing made sense, even when everything seemed terrible, they could still find reasons to smile together. The transformation that followed exceeded every projection in Xelari analytical models. As more humans reached out with friendship, jokes, and patient explanations of comedic concepts, Quarn found themselves not just understanding humor, but beginning to develop their own sense of timing, irony, and wit. They discovered that a perfectly logical species could learn to appreciate the perfectly illogical joy of a well-timed punchline. The Xelari Council, faced with unprecedented positive first contact results, grudgingly approved expanded cultural exchange programs. What they hadn't anticipated was how profoundly humor would change their own civilization. As Xelari researchers began incorporating human comedic concepts into their work, they discovered that laughter actually enhanced rather than hindered logical thinking. The ability to find amusement in unexpected connections led to creative breakthroughs in science, engineering, and philosophy. Within a year, Xelari society had developed its own comedy, traditions, sophisticated intellectual humor that played with mathematical concepts, linguistic paradoxes, and the absurdities inherent in trying to categorize an infinite universe. Their joke formats were complex and often required advanced degrees to understand, but they were unmistakably jokes, and they brought unmistakable joy. The first joint Human-Xelari comedy festival, broadcast across both worlds, became the most watched event in the history of either species. Humans marveled at Xelari comedians who could make quantum physics hilarious, while Xelari audiences discovered the profound wisdom hidden in human observations about everyday life. The universal translators worked overtime, but laughter, it turned out, needed no translation. But perhaps the most significant change was in how both species approached conflict resolution. When disagreements arose they inevitably did between cultures separated by billions of years of evolution, sides had learned to look for the humor in their misunderstandings. Diplomatic incidents that might have escalated into interstellar conflicts were diffused by well-timed jokes and shared laughter. The success of Human-Xelari relations inspired other alien civilizations to examine their own approach to first contact. Species that had remained isolated for millennia began reaching out, curious about these humans who could teach the logical Xelari to laugh. The galaxy gradually became a more connected, more joyful place, all because one species had discovered that the shortest distance between two hearts was a good joke. Quarn, now serving as the galaxy's first professor of interspecies humor studies, often reflected on that first encounter with a human construction worker who painted himself into a corner. They had established comedy exchange programs with 47 different civilizations, authored the definitive text on xenological laughter theory, and become something their logical ancestors never could have imagined. In their final research log, Quarn wrote, "After extensive analysis of the phenomenon humans call humor, I have reached a conclusion that would have horrified my predecessors, but fills me with what I now recognize as joy. Laughter is not a bug in the programming of consciousness, it is perhaps its most essential feature. To laugh, especially to laugh together, is to momentarily transcend the boundaries of individual existence and become part of something larger, warmer, and infinitely more wonderful than the sum of our separate selves." In the mathematics of emotion, laughter is the equation that always equals more than its parts. As this message propagated across the galactic communication network, translated into 1,000 languages and transmitted to 1,000,000 worlds, something extraordinary happened. Across the galaxy in research stations and homes, in alien hearts that had never known joy, in human hearts that had forgotten how to hope, beings of every conceivable form looked up at the stars and smiled. The universe, it turned out, had always been vast and mysterious and occasionally terrifying. But now, for the first time in cosmic history, it was also frequently, wonderfully, gloriously funny. And in that laughter, echoing across the void between worlds, the galaxy discovered something more powerful than any weapon, more valuable than any resource, and more beautiful than any star. The simple, perfect magic of beings, choosing to be joyful together. The Xelari had come to Earth expecting to find a primitive species. Instead, they discovered teachers who showed them that the most advanced civilizations were not those that had conquered emotion, but those that had learned to share it. In the end, humanity's greatest export to the galaxy was not technology or art or philosophy. It was the radical idea that existence could be not just endured or optimized, but actually, genuinely enjoyed. And somewhere in the cosmic background radiation of the universe, if you listen carefully enough, you can still hear the echo of that first shared laugh between worlds, sound that transformed the galaxy from a cold collection of distant lights into something that finally felt like home.